Badge didn't scan. Uniform looked old. "That's not clearance, that's nostalgia," the young officer scoffed, circling the janitor like a suspect instead of a man. The janitor said nothing, just waited, steady and silent, like men trained not to overreact. An hour later, a black SUV pulled up. The TSA Director stepped out, walked straight to the checkpoint and said, "You just detained the man who trained me." If that hit you deep, comment respect for the legends who never needed rank to command it. They always say the most dangerous people are the ones you never notice. Paul knew that. He counted on it. Every morning at 4:17 a.m., before the terminal screens flickered to life, before the first latte was poured or suitcase rolled across the tile, Paul was already there, not clocking in, just arriving. His shift didn't start until 5, but he liked the silence, the way the airport felt before the world flooded in. His name tag read, Paul, just Paul, clipped to a TSA janitorial uniform that had seen better decades. The fabric was faded, the stitching loose, the patch curling at the edges. But his boots were always polished, his hands were steady, his walk purposeful. He never limped, but if you looked closely, you'd see that he favored one leg. Most didn't look closely. Gate 4 was his. No one told him so. He just claimed it, swept it, wiped it, maintained it until no one else bothered. They joked he came with the building. Some thought he was part of a subcontractor who'd never been phased out. Others thought he was a volunteer with nowhere to go. Paul never corrected them. He liked being overlooked. It made his work easier and safer. He knew the habits of the terminal, which chairs wobbled, which tiles were chipped, which alarms ran 5 seconds late. He knew every red flag before it waved. He once stopped a short circuit from igniting a fire behind a coffee kiosk. Never mentioned it. Maintenance chalked it up to luck. Paul just nodded and went back to scrubbing a wall that didn't need it. That morning, March 7th, the air felt different. Not colder, not tenser. Just off. The badge scanner at Gate 4 blinked red when Paul tapped his ID. He tried again. Still red. That never happened. He checked the magnetic strip, wiped it against his sleeve, tried once more. A voice behind him said, "Try again, old man." Paul turned. 2 young TSA officers stood behind him, arms crossed, full of swagger and suspicion. One had a smirk like he practiced it in the mirror. The other chewed gum like it was a weapon. "You got clearance for this zone?" Smirk asked. Paul held up the badge. 27 years. That wasn't the question. He took the badge and examined it like it was fake currency. "This thing's older than my little brother." "It scans," Paul said. "Usually." "Yeah, well, today it doesn't." The gum chewer stepped forward. "You know the policy," Paul nodded. "I helped write it." Smirk laughed. "Right, you and your mop drafted airport security protocol." Paul didn't respond. He lowered his hand and let it rest by his side. The radio on the officer's vest crackled. Smirk keyed it. "This is Checkpoint Bravo. Possible unauthorized access at Gate 4. Elderly male, TSA uniform, unverified ID." Paul stood still, not defiant, not frightened, just still. He'd stood that way before in very different circumstances, when movement meant blood. His fingers twitched, but only slightly. The gum chewer circled him like a dog sniffing out trouble. "What's in the bag?" Paul passed it over. Inside were a thermos, a half-wrapped sandwich, and a black notebook with scuffed edges. Smirk opened it. Schematics, floor plans, emergency valve locations. Not doodles. Not nonsense. Real knowledge, mapped by hand. "What is this?" he asked. Paul shrugged. "Things people forget when alarms are screaming." "You think you're some kind of ghost operative?" "No," Paul said softly. "Ghosts don't leave fingerprints." Smirk snapped the notebook shut and handed it back. "You wait right here. Director's gonna want to look at this himself." Paul didn't argue. He took his seat on the bench outside Gate 4. right where the sunrise always caught the windows first. He unscrewed the thermos. Steam rose. Somewhere above, the intercom clicked on. "Director en route to Gate 4. Smirk paled. The gum stopped chewing. Paul just took a sip. He didn't smile. He'd already seen this play out before. Paul watched the light spill across the floor, like a tide coming in too slowly. Travelers began to drift through the terminal, dragging their suitcases, half asleep and half late. No one looked his way. No one ever did. Except the two guards who stood stiff now, unsure whether they had overplayed their hand. The gum chewer checked his watch like it could save him. Smirk adjusted his badge. Twice. The minutes crawled. Then came the sound that didn't belong. The tires. Thick. Deliberate. The kind of sound that makes trained instincts kick in before your brain catches up. Black SUV. Tinted windows. Government plates. The vehicle didn't hesitate. It curved into the side lane and stopped at the precise marker used for VIPs. The rear door opened. A man stepped out. Tall. Mid-60s. Trim suit, no TSA uniform. But every piece of him screamed authority. The director. Paul knew him. Hadn't seen him in nearly a decade. But people like them didn't forget faces, even when time had faded everything else. The director scanned the terminal until his eyes locked on Paul. He didn't look at the guards. Not yet. He walked past the checkpoints, past the baggage carts, past the schedule monitors blinking delayed on time. He stopped, 3 feet from the bench. Paul stood without needing to be asked. "Good morning, sir," Paul said. The director nodded once. "Morning, Commander." That word dropped like a hammer. Smirk blinked. "Wait, what did you just—" The director turned slowly, like a man choosing his words carefully. His eyes swept the two guards, cold and clear. "Which of you detained this man?" Neither spoke. "I asked a question." Gum chewer raised his hand halfway. "Sir, his badge didn't scan. We followed protocol." "You followed protocol," the director repeated, voice like steel and velvet. "Do you know who this man is?" "This man designed our emergency lockdown grid in 2002. After 9/11, while you were still memorizing your locker combinations. He was in DC, buried in security schematics with military analysts and aviation strategists. That badge you thought looked fake. It's one of only 4 issued during the transition phase. It predates your entire department." Smirk stepped back slightly. "This man ran counter-intel during the Gulf War. Built the evac code used during the Heathrow bomb threat. Wrote the mass casualty triage protocol for inbound aircraft emergencies. And if you had stopped looking at his age and started reading his notebook, you'd have realized the system you follow now. He helped write it." Paul stood still as always, but there was a slight shift in the way he held his shoulders. Not pride, just confirmation that the past wasn't a ghost after all. The director turned back. "Commander, you should not have to prove who you are at your own gate." Paul shook his head gently. "They were doing what they were trained to do." "No," the director said flatly. "They were doing what they were taught to do, without understanding why. That's how mistakes become tragedies." A small crowd had gathered now, travelers pretending not to watch. A flight attendant paused mid-walk. A barista lowered her milk frother. The gum chewer looked nauseous. Smirk said nothing. The director stepped closer to Paul and lowered his voice. "I didn't think you were still walking the terminals." "Someone has to," Paul said. "The systems still glitch. The locks still jam. I see the things you can't code for. You could have retired with honors. I did. Then I came back." "Why?" Paul looked toward Gate 4. "Because I know how fast red lights can turn into black smoke. And because respect fades faster than memory." The director said nothing for a moment. Then he turned to the guards. "You'll both report to Security Education Level 2. First thing tomorrow." "Yes, sir." "Commander Paul Weston is not to be stopped again, ever. Understood?" They nodded. Paul picked up his thermos. The tea was cold now. He didn't mind. The director didn't linger. He gave Paul a nod, not as an order but more like an acknowledgement, and then disappeared into the stream of early flights and forgotten names. The guards stayed still, unsure of how to proceed. Paul walked past them without even glancing in their direction. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. Instead, he moved like he always did, quietly, efficiently, and with no wasted motion. Now, however, every step he took seemed to echo a little louder in their ears. Back at Gate 4, he unlocked the supply closet and began his morning rounds. Mop, bucket, checklist. Same rhythm. Same order. The difference was that now, the guards no longer looked through him. They looked at him and saw something unfamiliar, something they didn't understand. Paul was fine with that. He was never there to be understood. His purpose was to keep things working. As the terminal filled, the buzz returned. Children began to cry. Coffee machines hissed in bursts of steam. Wheels clacked across the floor. A baby stroller caught on the same corner Paul had reported several times already. Of course, janitor reports rarely traveled far within the system. He logged it again anyway. At exactly 7:46 a.m., a flight attendant passed by. She was young and alert, phone in hand, earbuds in. Something about Paul must have caught her attention, because she stopped, looked back over her shoulder and asked, "Are you the guy they stopped earlier?" Paul nodded without explanation. She hesitated for a second, then said, "That was messed up." "It happens," he replied, voice even. She looked at him a little longer. "My dad was in the Navy. He always said the quiet ones are the ones you should watch out for." Paul didn't answer. There was no need to. She gave a small smile. "Thanks for keeping us safe, I guess." He nodded again, and she walked away without pressing further. By 8:03 a.m., no one in the terminal seemed to remember what had happened. However, the footage was already online. Someone had filmed the encounter from across the concourse. There was no audio, just the image of Paul sitting calmly on the bench, two guards standing nearby, and a man in a suit whose very posture conveyed a gravity heavier than anyone else in the building. The video caption read, "This janitor just got a personal visit from the TSA Director." Who is he? Paul didn't know anything about it. He didn't check social media. He still carried a flip phone that only called out, and only sometimes. By noon, that same day, the video had reached over 200,000 views. By the end of the day, it crossed 1 million. People began to recognize him. They didn't always say anything, but it was clear in the way their eyes lingered. A baggage handler offered him an extra coffee without a word. A pilot tipped his cap as he passed. Someone even left a thank you card tucked discreetly behind a trash bin near Gate 4. It simply read, "To the man who keeps the lights on, even when no one looks." Paul didn't react outwardly. He had read far more urgent messages scratched into concrete walls on foreign soil, some written with blood and desperation. Later that week, a brown envelope appeared in his locker. There was no return address. Inside was a single photograph, grainy and black and white, clearly captured from a drone in 2002. The image showed a tarmac, a jet surrounded by black SUVs, emergency responders frozen mid-sprint. In the corner, mostly hidden in the shadows, was a man in a maintenance uniform, holding a radio to his ear. On the back, someone had written, "You saved 211 lives that day. We didn't forget." No name, no signature. Paul stared at the photo for a long moment. Then, wordlessly, he slid it into the back of his notebook. People forgot many things these days. Names, faces, principles. They remembered hashtags and headlines far more easily than they remembered the ones who cleared exit routes or patched the leaks that no one saw. That was fine. Paul had never been after recognition. But now and then it was good to be reminded that even shadows could carry weight. By Monday, the airport issued an internal memo. It was short and unusually poetic for something bureaucratic. All personnel are reminded that respect does not rely on title, and protocol should never replace perception. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew. Paul's name had traveled through the system faster than most emergency alerts ever had. Security briefings now began with a single slide, a grainy image of Paul standing beside the director. Underneath were just 7 words. You never know who you're stopping. At Gate 4, things changed subtly. Maintenance staff from other terminals dropped by with questions they used to Google. TSA officers gave nods with less suspicion and more humility. One afternoon, a young dispatcher brought him a fresh badge. New lamination, same name, same photo. She said nothing, just handed it over and walked away. Paul tucked it into his pocket but never used it. The old one still scanned fine. Once someone corrected the registry. 3 weeks later, he received a call he hadn't expected. The number flashed unknown, but the voice was familiar. It belonged to the director's assistant, a woman Paul once trained during her internship with Homeland Security. She asked if he could stop by Washington. There was something they wanted his insight on. He took the overnight train, not for nostalgia, but because it gave him time to think. He watched the world blur past the window and wondered if any of it really changed, or if people just forgot their lessons more slowly than before. The meeting room was smaller than he expected. 4 people, no press, no handshakes, just quiet professionals. They showed him new simulations for terminal breaches. They wanted to know if the new logic trees held up. Paul read silently, then shook his head. They had accounted for tech failure, but not for human panic. He rewrote 3 lines on the whiteboard. No one argued. Afterward, the director walked him out personally. They didn't speak until they reached the sidewalk. You never wanted any of this, did you? The director asked. Paul looked at the passing taxis. Number, but I never wanted to watch things fall apart either. You think they're still falling? I think they always are. The point is to be near enough when the cracks start. The director nodded. Come back when you can. Paul said he would. But both knew he probably wouldn't. He wasn't built for meetings and committees anymore. He was built for corridors and back rooms, for circuits and silent alarms, for catching problems before someone needed a headline to name them. Back at the airport, a mural was commissioned. Nothing extravagant, just a wall along Terminal D, near the service hallway no one ever cared about. It showed a pair of polished boots walking down a corridor, mop in one hand, badge in the other. No face, no name. The plaque simply read, "For the ones who guard without glory." Paul saw it once, stared at it longer than he meant to, then turned and kept walking. That afternoon, he helped an elderly woman locate a gate change, replaced a broken ceiling tile, flagged a luggage cart for leaking battery acid, logged it, cleaned it. The guards who once questioned him now greeted him with a nod and a small gap in their stance, like they had made room for someone older, wiser, and far more dangerous than he looked. Summer came, and the mornings grew warmer. Paul adjusted his schedule by 15 minutes, not because he had to, but because that's when the sun caught the corridor just right. He liked watching it hit the glass at Gate 4, streaking through the terminal like a signal no one else could read. The world moved faster now, but he hadn't. He didn't need to. The director retired that August. His farewell address was short, delivered at a secure auditorium in D.C. Toward the end, he held up a laminated badge, one of the originals, and said, "Leadership is often confused with visibility, but the ones who make us safest are usually the ones we overlook. I was trained by one of them. I hope you're lucky enough to meet yours." They didn't publish the speech, but someone leaked the clip anyway. It went viral for a week, maybe two, before the internet moved on to something shinier and louder. Paul never mentioned it. In late September, a young TSA officer approached him at a vending machine near Terminal B. He looked nervous, like he'd rehearsed the moment. "Sir, Paul, I read your file," he said. Paul didn't respond, just sipped his coffee. The officer continued. "My brother's in the Air Force. He said guys like you don't usually hang around. Said if I ever met one I should ask a question." Paul turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "What would you have done different?" the officer asked. Paul paused for a long moment. The terminal buzzed behind them. He stared at the coffee rising in his cup. "I would have taught earlier," he said finally. "Not just protected, not just corrected, but taught." The officer nodded. Paul walked away. He didn't notice the mural had been expanded. Someone added a faint radio signal, rising from the mop handle like a silent transmission. It was subtle. Most didn't see it, unless they already knew. Winter returned. Paul kept showing up. He cleared storm drains, helped guide lost families, repaired a fuse box during a blackout without being asked. When the fire alarms failed their routine test, he fixed the relay in under 8 minutes. No one asked how he knew which wire was faulty. They just handed him a sandwich and told him lunch was on them. In January, he missed a shift, then another. No announcement, no broadcast, just silence. His locker was left untouched for weeks. Eventually, a supervisor opened it. Inside was his old notebook, the edges more worn than before. On the last page, a single sentence had been added in his exacting print. "If you are reading this, remember that systems fail. People choose." No funeral was held. No obituary posted. But over the next few months, something shifted in the culture of the airport. New hires were told about the man with the mop. Officers began shadowing maintenance rounds. A protocol review board added an unofficial clause: consult local intelligence before escalation. It was informally called Paul's Rule. By spring, the plaque beneath the mural had been replaced. The new one read, "He didn't ask for thanks. He asked for vigilance." Somewhere, a flip phone buzzed in a desk drawer that no one ever emptied. It never rang again. But when red lights blinked in the dark, when protocols tangled in confusion, and when a quiet figure in uniform swept unnoticed through the corner of the terminal, some swore they still saw him. And even if they didn't, they behaved like they might. Because legends don't need spotlights. They need space to work and respect.